I was the last person to board this flight. Literally ran into the cabin a minute before they shut the doors, out of breath, dragging my suitcase, which had already given up on life somewhere back at check-in. The past week had been absolute hell, late-night calls with clients, endless bugs, reports, spreadsheets, coffee instead of real food. All I wanted was to get out of here and finally pass out for at least a couple of hours. Barely shoving my suitcase into the overhead bin, I collapsed into my window seat with a sigh. That was it. I made it. Nothing could stop me now. My seatmate was already there, a well-dressed woman in her 50s with a sharp bob haircut and a business suit. She was holding a magazine, but kept glancing at me from time to time. I felt that look immediately. You know, when someone isn't just looking at you but through you, studying, analyzing, trying to figure something out. Do I have ketchup on my face? I wondered. Or am I breathing weird? But I had no energy to figure it out. I just closed my eyes and instantly passed out. I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. Excuse me, a voice said, but you're a pilot, right? I blinked, trying to process. My head was still heavy from sleep, and the cabin noise buzzed in my ears. What? The woman was looking at me with absolute certainty, like she already knew the answer and was just waiting for my confession. I saw you at the airport. You have the same kind of suitcase pilots do. And you boarded last, right before they closed the doors. That's what they do, isn't it? I glanced at my battered suitcase, the same one that had been on so many trips. I was pretty sure it had its own frequent flyer status. It's just a normal suitcase. But she wasn't buying it. You don't have to admit it, she whispered conspiratorially. I get it. You have your protocols. Just tell me the truth. Is everything under control? I hesitated. Should I tell her I was just an exhausted office worker who was about to pass out again in 2 minutes? Or should I play along? I chose the second option. Keeping a straight face, I nodded slightly and said in my calmest, most reassuring voice, "Everything is under control, ma'am." Her entire body relaxed. She let out a deep breath like I had just confirmed that the plane wasn't about to nosedive. "I knew it," she said, satisfied. After my reassuring answer, my seatmate finally relaxed. She smiled, put her magazine away, and now looked at me with clear admiration. "You must be exhausted," she said sympathetically. "A little," I admitted honestly. "Of course. You probably just got off another flight. I heard they make pilots hop between routes all the time, barely giving you a break." I just nodded, hiding a smirk. "It happens," I said vaguely, figuring that the less detail, the lower the chance of getting caught. And then the plane gave a small shake. A tiny air pocket. I barely noticed, but she immediately grabbed the armrest. "Oh no," she exhaled. Is that normal?" I glanced out the window. The sky was a bit cloudy, but nothing serious. "Completely normal," I said confidently. "Just some turbulence, perfectly safe." She nodded, clearly trying to calm herself. "I just don't really like flying, you know? And when it starts shaking, my mind goes straight to the worst possible scenarios." I nodded knowingly. A lot of people feel that way. The key is to remember that planes are built to handle much worse. She pressed her lips together, thinking for a moment. Then, suddenly, she leaned in conspiratorially and whispered, "Have you ever, had to take over?" I almost laughed. "Oh, like, when something goes wrong," she clarified, eyes shining with excitement. "When, say, the captain gets sick, and you have to step into the cockpit and take control?" The look in her eyes was priceless. I could practically see her imagining the entire Hollywood movie playing out. The undercover pilot, disguised as a regular passenger, forced to land the plane in extreme conditions. "Hasn't happened yet," I said after a thoughtful pause. "But we're trained to be ready for anything." She nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. True professionals." Then the plane gave another small shake, and she gasped again. I decided to add a little flair. I casually checked my watch, as if I were timing something important. "We'll be out of this turbulence soon," I said with an air of authority. "How do you know?" she asked immediately. I thought fast. "Timing. We're over the central states right now. Wind currents are common here, but they usually pass quickly." She stared at me in awe. "Wow, you just know these things incredible." I nodded, doing my best to keep a straight face, and reached for my water cup to take a sip. And right at that moment, as if on cue, the plane gave another tiny bump, and I nearly spilled water on myself. She immediately leaned in. "That wasn't normal turbulence, was it?" she asked, her voice hushed but serious. I quickly swallowed my water and shook my head, still well within normal limits. But she was already convinced I was hiding something serious. Okay, I won't panic, she whispered. The important thing is that you're here. If anything happens, I'll be the first to help you get to the cockpit. Once again, I turned to stare out the window, mostly to hide the grin creeping onto my face. Well, now that the game has begun, might as well play it till the end, I thought, casually grabbing a cracker from my tray. So my legendary status as the undercover pilot was now officially locked in. Now all I had to do was wait for landing, or maybe, just maybe, something even better was coming next. My seatmate was looking at me with such admiration that I almost felt like a real pilot. Just a couple of hours ago, I was a guy hoping to get some rest, and now, it seemed I had a new role, the undercover aviation hero. But then something happened that I didn't expect. Sorry, but, she leaned in again. I have to tell you something. Yeah? I raised an eyebrow. We've got you figured out, Captain. What? Who's this we? I blinked. She smiled slyly and gave me a knowing nod toward the row across the aisle. I followed her gaze and saw a man in his 60s sitting across the aisle. The guy looked like a real air traffic controller from a movie. Neatly combed gray hair, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, and a serious expression. And most importantly, he was looking at me just like my seatmate. We knew right away who you were, my seatmate triumphantly declared. I mentally groaned. Her husband. The man nodded. You shouldn't have taken that suitcase, young man. That was the first clue. First clue. Do I have undercover pilot written on my forehead or something? My seatmate turned to him. I told you right away, he's not your average passenger. You saw how he boarded. I did, he nodded seriously. Calm, confident, no rush. Like a person used to dealing with emergency situations. I literally ran through the airport, gasping for breath like a marathon runner, but okay. And the best part, she continued, turning back to me, was when the turbulence hit, you didn't just sit there calmly. You even checked the time. The man nodded approvingly. I noticed that too. Like a pilot calculating when we'd be out of the turbulence zone. I could barely contain my laughter. Well. Don't worry, she interrupted. We won't tell anyone. You're probably flying as a secret inspector, right? Checking how your colleagues are doing. I coughed, trying to hide my laughter. Secret inspector? Well, we won't blow your cover, Captain. Her husband winked at me. We'll just fly calmly. I realized that if I kept denying it, they'd think I was just too deep undercover. So, I just nodded, looked as mysterious as possible, and, like it was some important moment, put my finger to my lips. Agreed, I said. She beamed, and her husband nodded with satisfaction. But the funniest part happened 5 minutes later. When the flight attendant came by with drinks, the woman suddenly grabbed her hand and whispered conspiratorially, "Excuse me, but did you know we have a pilot inspector on board?" I almost choked on my juice. The flight attendant blinked, clearly trying to figure out what was going on. Sorry, who? She triumphantly pointed to me. Him. The flight attendant looked at me. I saw the "oh no not this again" look in her eyes. I immediately decided to save her. I'm just a traveler. But my seatmate slapped the armrest. Of course, you can't admit it. You've got a protocol. The flight attendant exhaled subtly, poured the water quickly, and then scurried to the back of the cabin. My seatmate looked at me proudly. Well done. You're holding strong under pressure. I realized my new status couldn't be undone now. The only thing left to do was wait for landing and act like I wasn't here. But something told me this would be harder than I thought. As soon as we started descending and I felt the landing was near, one thought crossed my mind. I need to wrap up this performance quickly before it's too late. But then a new factor appeared on my horizon, one that made me reconsider everything. My seatmate, it seemed, had decided that she was now my main partner in this mission. And to make it official, she put her hand on my shoulder with such serious posture. It was as if I were her undercover colleague. "You're doing great, Captain," she whispered, proudly nodding toward the other passengers. I immediately felt like I had to play along. And while the whole plane seemed to be in its final panic mode, I glanced at the display showing the course and speed. I even raised my hand, as though I was in control of the situation. "We'll be landing soon." "Almost there," I said, though deep down I knew I was far from any real piloting skills. Her husband, who, remember, was also in on this conspiracy, stood up and began walking around the cabin, casually asking the flight attendants about the current weather conditions. No storms. We're landing on schedule. Everything's calm. I couldn't hold back anymore. I began to wonder whether I'd be handed over to the police once we landed. And then things got even worse. A couple of minutes before landing, when we were almost on the ground, there was a strange sound, something that sounded like a stuck wheel. Passengers started glancing at each other, but no one could say for sure what was going on. I immediately turned to my seatmate. It's a normal sound. It's a check. She widened her eyes. A check? Well, sometimes the wheels make a little extra noise when we land. It's normal. She started to lose confidence. We both silently watched as other passengers, who hadn't figured it out yet, began nervously chuckling, only to quiet down when the flight attendant came out with a smile and announced that everything was fine. But then something completely unexpected happened. When the plane finally touched down and the usual applause began, my seatmate stood up, grabbed my shoulder, and loudly declared, "Well, Captain, we made it through all of that with you. Thanks for the amazing work." At that moment, I realized, this mystery is going to have to end, or I'll actually have to be a pilot on the next flight. Everyone in the cabin started laughing and clapping. And, strangely enough, I thought they might actually believe this whole thing. I glanced at the flight attendant, who was sitting nearby and simply rolling her eyes. But then, another miracle happened. As we were exiting the cabin, the very same man with glasses, the captain of this whole show, caught up to us. He came up and jokingly said, "Well, Captain, I think it's time you move me to business class to compensate for all this emotional trauma." I laughed. "Then I'll have to keep this roll up to the end," I replied, smiling. They both laughed in return, and I realized this had been the strangest and funniest flight of my life. But the finale wasn't as unexpected as I thought. When we finally got out of the terminal and were heading to baggage claim, I noticed how all the passengers nearby were exchanging glances and quietly discussing my top secret status. I felt like, despite all my efforts, the role of the undercover pilot inspector had stuck with me. It was a weird but funny kind of fame. And who would have thought that I'd become the hero of this entire story? But in that moment, I realized one thing. All I had to do was find my character. And I nailed it, perfectly.